The March Worlds are a collection of microstates that lie along the anti-spinward edge of the inner sphere, what is colloquially referred to as the Galactic Southwest, namely the Illyrian Palatinate, Lothian League, Circinus Federation, and Marian Hegemony. Despite their close proximity, the history and culture of these nations is quite varied, from the hardy pioneers who first colonized the region to the bandit kingdoms that arose in the turmoil of the succession wars. Before any of those came onto the scene, others had already made their home in this distant sector. It's not known exactly when the area was first explored, but these initial settlers originated from North and Central America. The colonists harkened back to their frontiersman ancestors, with exaggerated cowboy personas becoming a distinct characteristic of the group. They would settle a trio of systems along the border of the modern-day Periphery, establishing a capital on Sierra and naming their community the Intendancy of New Spain. While the ranchers were able to achieve a level of self-sufficiency, they also adopted more sinister traits, becoming some of the earliest known interstellar bandits. After the much larger Freewells League came into existence in 2271, it gradually expanded outwards, bringing it into range of the cowboy pirates. New Spain quickly became too much of a nuisance to leave unchecked. During the Age of War, the Captain General dispatched his forces to eradicate the threat, absorbing the trio of planets into their realm in the process. Despite this defeat, they retained much of their heritage within the larger state, with the inhabitants of the so-called Trinity Worlds still viewed as fringe eccentrics. As the Terran Alliance began to collapse in the early 24th century, another wave of refugees headed out towards the Periphery. This next batch to reach the March Worlds were primarily of Scandinavian descent, establishing a home for themselves on Illyria. The Illyrian Palatinate was officially incorporated within a few decades of their arrival, numbering 4 systems in total. The worlds they had chosen were not particularly well suited for agriculture, and so they quickly established ties to the Freewells League to ensure they had sufficient food. Their chief export was base metals, primarily iron and processed steel, which the League was happy to buy from them at discount prices. In later years, they carved out a niche for themselves by hosting regular arena duels as a source of both entertainment and revenue. One of the curiosities of the Star League era is that the Illyrian Palatinate was never assimilated into the League's territory, even during the expansionist years of the Reunification War. Perhaps the reason was little more than their relative insignificance. Their society has remained almost completely unchanged for over half a millennium, the population of Illyria growing to a modest 190,000 in that time, ruled by an alliance of founding families. Over time, as the Great Houses grew increasingly exploitative of the subjugated territorial states, it sparked insurrection within those Periphery realms. Die-hard Taurian patriots fought back, but were crushed by the mighty Star League Defense Force. The survivors from one of these rebellions, led by Angelina Logan, would become the latest group to settle the March Worlds, arriving at frigid Lothario in 2691. Their troubled past meant that they were fiercely isolationist, rarely dealing with the rest of human space. But the denizens of the inner sphere would soon be coming to them, whether they wanted it or not. The inhabitants of this remote sector existed in the shadow of their larger neighbours throughout much of their early history, foremost among which was the Rimworld's Republic. The Amaris realm had steadily expanded along the edge of the Lyran Commonwealth, reaching as far as the Trinity Worlds. When the fateful confrontation between Alexander Kerensky's defense force and Stefan Amaris' empire laid waste to the Star League, it dragged the Rimworld's Republic down with it, leading to a mass exodus of refugees. Over the course of 20 years, 6 other nearby systems were colonized under Lothario's purview. These planets received proper representation in 2815 with the formation of the Lothian League. 2933 marked a turning point for the League, when bandit attacks led to the destruction of vital facilities and a large part of their transport fleet. This forced an end to a centuries-long period of isolation, and they cautiously began establishing new trade connections with the outside world. Their Taurian ancestry gave them a strong distrust for the Inner Sphere, but they found willing markets for their chief exports, namely copper, iron, and furs, within both the neighbouring Illyrian Palatinate and Magistracy of Canopus. The greatest boon came with the discovery of abundant radioactives, giving the microstate a new source of wealth to exploit. Their latest census reported that the population of the capital world has surpassed 2 million, all under the watchful protection of Grand Mistress Lorelei Logan. During the Star League Civil War, one of the SLDF's main bases of operation had been the planet Circinus, where the mercenary regiment, the Black Warriors, were responsible for training the enormous number of volunteers who flocked to Kerensky's side. But when the commanding general led his followers into exile, their mercenary allies were snubbed, never receiving word of their plans until months after their departure. In 2785, the phony war ignited across the Inner Sphere. It was plain for all to see that this would be just a prelude to a much larger conflict to come, and so several communities within the rimward end of the Lyran Commonwealth's Illyrian province uprooted themselves and headed for the Periphery while they still could, hoping to escape the coming destruction. Many were drawn to Circinus, where they made contact with the Black Warriors. Together, they reached an amicable agreement wherein the mercenaries would provide protection, and the expats would produce everything the colony needed to become self-sufficient. This arrangement worked well, but Colonel Zachariah Chirion desired greater luxuries than their humble farming community could provide them with. From the perspective of their new compatriots, they continued to operate as mercenaries, but in truth had turned to piracy. No one was spared from their raids, necessitating the nearby Illyrian Palatinate and Lothian League to acquire their first military defences, but particularly hard hit were the border worlds of the Free Worlds League. In 2853, the latest Captain General, Charles Marik, again directed the FWLM towards the emerging Periphery threat. Leading the assault were none other than their old brothers-in-arms, the Eridani Lighthorse. The nascent Circinus Federation was forced to accept a deal that would see them conscripted into Marik's military and unleashed on the Lyran Commonwealth as a diversionary force. The two mercenary groups were at each other's throats from the outset, culminating in a battle that saw the Black Warriors functionally eliminated. Meanwhile, the Marik occupation force was riding roughshod over the more legitimate farmers, doing little to endear those people to long-term integration with the Free Worlds League. When the FWLM withdrew in 2871, the planet quickly reverted back to quiet independence. In 2990, President of the Circinus Federation, CJ Bob McIntyre, began a program of gradual expansion. Over the next 3 decades, they would gradually incorporate a handful of systems that once belonged to either the Rimworld's Republic or Lyran Commonwealth, while establishing new colonies further out. This attracted a handful of mining concerns to partner with them, as well as giving the farmers the ability to increase the Federation's agrarian output, in turn becoming a minor trading partner for the Lyrans. Though McIntyre looked to be on the cusp of transforming his realm into a respectable Periphery microstate, Circinus could never fully shake off its past. It was perhaps during this period that Adam Chirion took command of the rebuilt Black Warriors, and again began terrorizing local star systems, all with the approval of the President. Their activities were euphemistically referred to as covert operations, the true nature of which was again downplayed among their own population. What wasn't immediately apparent was that one of the systems they had claimed was also home to a small community of Lothian drovers since 2992. The planet, which was variably called Dercedat or Blantlef depending on who you asked, was desired for its breed of hearty livestock that would prove a tremendous boon for whichever realm could farm them. In 3003, the Circinian government decided to drive the Lothians off in order to lay sole claim to the world. A small force was sent to deal with the settlers, but struggled to locate the nomadic farming community. Their arrival had not gone unnoticed, and word was dispatched back to Lothario requesting assistance. The League promptly hired a handful of mercenary companies and dispatched them to Dercedatz, catching the Federation troops completely unprepared. The issue was finally resolved in 3025 when the Black Warriors returned to Blantlef, eradicating anyone who opposed McIntyre's rule. The last of the 4 microstates to emerge among the March Worlds has its origin in the Alfard Trading Company, a major arms manufacturer from the latter years of the Star League. In the 28th century, it expanded out into the Periphery, establishing a self-titled colony world of its own in the process. The ATC would not survive the succession wars, and so this distant outpost and its manufacturing centres lay dormant until 2920, when Johann Sebastian O'Reilly visited the planet. There he made a remarkable discovery: a stockpile of germanium worth approximately 50 billion C-bills. Rather than retire to live a life of luxury, he decided to use his newfound wealth to establish a realm of his own beyond the borders of the Inner Sphere, the Marian Hegemony. Small pirate bands lurked in this uncharted region, so Johann contracted a handful of merc units in 2922 to form the core of his First Legion, which he used to pacify the main threats, after which he put out a call for fresh colonists. By 2930, the hegemony had expanded rimward into another 8 systems. Styling it after the ancient Roman Republic, O'Reilly's growing empire developed a unique culture. New arrivals were designated either plebs or patricians, depending on whether one could afford to buy land. Class is hereditary, with better opportunities available to patricians, regardless of how an individual family's fortunes might have waxed or waned over the decades. For a time, purchasing land to acquire patricianship was seen as the ultimate goal for plebs, though unclaimed territory became increasingly scarce over time, and the practice was eventually outlawed in 3013. Overall control of the realm rests with the Imperator, a position that was handed down to Johann's son Gaius and later Marius in 3009. Officially, the Marian hegemony operates as a democracy, with plebs and patricians electing members of the latter to the Senate, the nation's chief legislative body. The Imperator retains the power of veto, but can only cast tie-breaking votes. However, since they appoint the heads of each Senate Council and act as Commander-in-Chief of the Marian Hegemony Armed Forces, their influence is significant. As progressive as this sounds for such a lawless region, there are darker aspects to this periphery nation. Those who could not pay for their own travel out to Alfard or its sister worlds and reached their destination only through the charity of the O'Reillys became members of the slave class, bound to work as labourers for the rest of their days. This too was hereditary, with few opportunities to win plebeian status. Despite these harsh realities, there was no shortage of refugees willing to accept the price to escape the turmoil of the Third Succession War. Furthermore, the Marian hegemony has used letters of marque against their neighbours throughout its history as a way to subsidise their economy. Prisoners taken on these raids invariably become slaves themselves, unless wealthy relatives back in their home nations can pay for their release from servitude. The magistracy of Canopus watched this new realm expand towards its borders with growing concern, especially as reports of pirate activity increased. In 2963, the magistracy armed forces concocted a plan that they hoped would deal with the threat once and for all. A dummy industrial site was thrown together at Thraxa, the planet closest to the hegemony, and an MAF regiment camped in secret nearby. In the end, it took 15 years for O'Reilly to take the bait, but when they stumbled into the prepared ambushes amidst the fake factories, the bandits were swiftly eradicated. Since taking office, Marius has attempted to repair this relationship, hoping to achieve lucrative trade deals that would allow him to exploit the remaining germanium deposits still buried beneath the surface of Alfard. Pirate activity has been redirected towards the more vulnerable March worlds. Only time will tell if any of these 4 states can develop into a true regional power, or whether they will succumb to the depredations of the periphery.